Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Creating an Adaptable Approach to Talent Acquisition. My name is Melissa, and I will be kicking things off for us today. Let's start with some brief introductions. Our presenters today are Don McAvoy, who is the VP of Global Marketing and Managing Director Canada at HireRoad, and Cliff Stevenson, who is the Principal Talent Acquisition and HR Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group. Don's journey with HireRoad began in 2021 as the company began to extend their 20 years of HR software experience into modern, flexible solutions designed for today's dynamic people needs. She has more than 20 years of experience building dynamic brands and robust marketing teams that deliver value for customers and drive growth for SaaS companies. With a reputation for driving positive change, Don helps transform brands, not just externally, but internally as well. Prior to HireRoad, Don led marketing for Apex Learning, Zello, and Rosetta Stone's B2B division. She holds an MBA from East Carolina University and a BA in English and Linguistics from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Don is based in Toronto, Ontario. I would like to extend a thank you to HireRoad for sponsoring today's webinar. HireRoad is a leading provider of modern talent acquisition software. Hiring in today's world requires focus on employee fit and engagement from job description to job success. HireRoad software, developed by veteran industry experts, provides the ability to attract, hire, onboard, and train the right people so they thrive. The company serves both public and private sectors, including government, retail, manufacturing, education, healthcare, and utilities. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, we are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. A quick mention that we currently have several certifications programs open for enrollment, including our Certified Learning Strategist program. For a full list, you can visit our main website, certification.brandonhall.com, for more information. Your participation in our surveys is one of the most crucial components of our research. So if you have a few minutes to spare and see any topics that you would like to take a survey for, it's always greatly appreciated. Links will be available in your handout, and you can always visit brandonhall.com for the latest list. All participants do receive a piece of complimentary research once the results have been analyzed. And last, but certainly not least, a few logistics to cover. To ask questions today, we encourage you to use the questions panel on your control bar. Today's presentation is being recorded, and we will share a link to the recording and a PDF version of the presentation via email in roughly 24 hours. The chat is also open for today, so we invite you to join in on today's discussion, discuss things amongst yourselves, share your thoughts as we go through, or just simply pop in and say hello. And we do encourage you to let us know where you're joining in from today. And lastly, if you would like to download a copy of today's presentation instantly, a link to do so will be made available momentarily in the chat. And without any further delay, I'm going to turn things over to Cliff so we can dive right in.
Hello, and I already see people in the chat mentioning they're from Florida. I'll go ahead and go through the agenda that we're going to be talking about talent acquisition adapting, how EVP plays a role in this, how technology can help. We'll talk about some takeaways and some best practices. You'll probably notice that you don't see the stunning and charming visages of Dawn and me. That is because I am in Florida as well. I'm running this so far so good. Melissa as well is in South Florida, so she's begun the hurricane prep. But as we kind of look at the next slide, which shows the abstract and the information we're going to talk about today, I couldn't think of a more fitting fact than that we're doing this during a hurricane. Dawn is also having to adapt to having come from a board of directors meeting. And I think it's a perfect example of what we mean when we talk about adaptability. It's not just global pandemics. It could be strong weather. It could be changing market conditions, demographics, all of those types of things. And that's what we're really getting at when we talk about being adaptive, because this isn't going to change. Although there won't always be a hurricane, fingers crossed, there will always be something that comes up. And if that is used as an excuse, then you'll never be able to create a better and more, adaptive talent acquisition strategy to meet the needs of a changing workplace. The talent market has changed, our way we do work has changed, and we just have to accept the fact that things are going to be a little different now. And if that means that, I may need to switch over to the telephone at one point during this, then, that's what we'll do. But we'll do our best, because this is an important topic. And although we didn't plan on making it so adaptive and fluid, we're going to do our best to kind of prove it. So, going from that, I think Dawn has really created a really nice graphic here that talks about this Venn diagram of the talent markets requiring that adaptability and recruiters needing to be adaptive from their own internal pressures. And again, that's not going to change anytime soon. That's just the new normal. And the new normal is that there isn't normal anymore. That's just something we know.
Absolutely. So a shout out to Ruth. Ruth, I saw that you were from Fayetteville, North Carolina. I am a North Carolina girl living in Ontario, Canada. So hello to my peeps at home. Yeah, flexibility, adaptability, it's kind of the name of the game. And I come at it from the perspective that technology can help. So when things are fluid, when we need ways to navigate new norms, there is technology that can help. So from a talent acquisition perspective, talent acquisition professionals, you guys have to focus on multiple avenues of recruitment. You've got constantly changing external, internal pressures, the uncertainty of what skills are going to be needed in a few years, much less the skills that are needed today, which may be different than the skills that are needed tomorrow. I know that we've been dealing with, we're going to recruit for these 3 positions as a priority. Nope. Based on market conditions and what we're dealing with as a business, we need to pivot and focus on these instead. Organizations that plan to succeed, you have to give your talent acquisition teams the tools to support a really adaptive mindset so that you can manage these constant shifts, which everybody's dealing with a lot these days. So anything we can do to make it easier for people. Modern software, modern HR software that's built for today's needs, not necessarily the needs of 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, when the world was a little bit more predictable. Or at least we thought it was. Maybe it never was, and now we're just figuring that out. I'm not quite sure. But modern HR software built for today's needs can connect the work that you do to critical business outcomes. So it's the talent acquisition is the very, very front end of a people strategy for an organization. So how can you think about leveraging data and tools so that a business's people practice has the data and insights and intelligence and processes and workflows that it needs to help drive business strategy? How do you streamline the processes for agility and speed? And how do you deliver an amazing candidate experience? One that genuinely conveys your employer value proposition so that when you're out there recruiting for folks, you're finding folks that actually fit your business. With the turnover rates that we're seeing, people changing from job to job, it's more important than ever that people go to work for a company that they feel is a good fit for them and vice versa. So research shows that helping candidates and internal teams make the best use of available tools to help attract, hire, onboard, train, and retain employees that fit. So I know Cliff's going to walk through a bit of the research.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's important, one of the points you sort of just mentioned on, which is that, The very best talent acquisition professionals are doing more than just reacting, right? They're thinking proactively, and they're thinking not just about what are the tools that I need, but what will those tools be like for those candidates to give them the right candidate experience, right? We're looking for systems that can adapt, that can flex, that allow people to do what they're trying to do as well, to not have to do multiple logins, or be able to get on anywhere from any type of device, tools that actually help, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I know from where I sit on the marketing side, so HR seems to be going through this transition, over the last few years. You've been going over what marketing went through a few years before, where the proliferation of tools that are available to you to make your life, your day-to-day working life better, to help you reach more people or whatever it is that you're trying to do. There's so many tools, which is amazing and exciting and also really stressful at times. It gets cumbersome logging into multiple systems day in and day out, especially when those tools don't all speak to each other. So, I know in my world, on the sales and marketing front, we have multiple tools that we've got really rich data in each of them, but the integration work that has to happen so that we can follow the data from a business process flow. HR is kind of dealing with that now, where you've got all of these tools and they do amazing things, but a lot of times they're isolated and they all represent a very specific piece of the overall journey a prospective candidate might take. You think about a candidate going from a job candidate to a contributing employee. There are a lot of steps in between those and lots of tools to help, but they don't necessarily talk to each other. We'll get into the technology in a little bit, but I know Cliff's got some research on findings about the changing world of our work today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, I will say, is one that surprised me. I don't know how many of you might have seen a webinar from the last 2 years from Braden Hall Group, where we've been asking this question, I would say since the beginning of the pandemic, or at least the working from home era, about every 6 months. And at the beginning, it really seemed as if, we were going to go back to the office. There was going to be more people working from home than there were before, but it wasn't going to be as drastic. It might be, now there's 25% or maybe even 30% of people in 2022 or whenever that might have been, that were going to be working from home. And now we're looking at, over 2/3 of people. And I know that that's been my experience. I know that's anecdotal evidence, but, a lot of people I know as well. And remember, it's not just about the pandemic. There's other things like the digitalization of the workforce, more knowledge economy type jobs, generational shifts, more people that expect flexible schedules and flexible work locations, and that are thinking differently about what a work-life balance even is, and just more jobs that allow for this type of work, right? So that means that we're thinking more as organizations about how do we provide the tools that these people need, to provide safety and security, but also things that show our organizational culture and other things that make working at our organizations unique, or that give us that employer value proposition. So let's talk about, how these sort of trends are changing, and what does this mean for those of us that work from home? It's one thing to say, okay, more people are working from home, but okay, what does that mean? What does that mean for all of us? So obviously there's more distractions. I don't know if people want to sort of raise their hand or let us know in the chat how many of you are working from home, how many for you that's a new thing. But I know that when I first began working from home about 10 years ago, that distraction from home, that probably would have been my number one pick. I think the stress and anxiety is perhaps a more recent thing, but it does show that we're more in tune with what's going on externally. Sure, my stress and anxiety might be a little higher today. And the big thing that I think is worth thinking about is managers' inexperience in managing remote workers, the skills that are needed. But then also think about that in terms of recruiters. How good are they at communicating the types of support that your organization can give, the type of tools that will be given out, and how you can kind of support people both from the management side, from the candidate side, and how do you again get across these corporate values? How do you show the support? Because it's one thing to have all the great options and all this great organizational support that you could give to people, but if it's not being communicated, then it's almost like it was never there, right? So it's one thing to have it, and that's good. That's definitely the baseline. But then you've also got to find a way to communicate that during candidate interactions.
Yeah, so there are some other projected outcomes of the changing world of work. And before I pivot to that, just the whole communication issue. So we are a remote first organization, which means that working from home or working remotely is the default standard. We do have some offices and we do get together occasionally for meetings, but for the most part, it is remote. And the way we need to communicate with employees is very different remotely. And I'm not quite sure why. I'm sure there's probably research that talks about it, but just the extra, I call it the extra lift from a management perspective in trying to communicate. You have to communicate at least 30% more. So there are other changes or other projected outcomes of the changing world of work. So occupation transitions. I personally know at least 10 people off the top of my head that have completely switched professions, much less just jobs. And I think that will continue to increase. And I think that amount of transition will become a bit more normal. And then on the next slide, other projected outcomes. So increase in occupation transitions between pre and post COVID. So the total number of workers making these occupational changes, just look at some of the numbers. The circles below represent millions of people. So 17 million people in the US looking at shifting occupations. And that creates a lot of work for talent acquisition folks. It also creates a lot of work in respect to your employee value proposition to really convey it up front to make sure that you're finding people that again fit you as an organization. So EVP, it matters more than ever. Candidates and employees, they expect different things. Employees are very, very different today than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I don't necessarily know that they care more, or if it's just that they talk about caring more today about what it is that an employer stands for, what's the value proposition that they deliver. People really care about where they work. I think COVID shifted a lot for a lot of people. And they want to know, what kind of company is this? What do they stand for? What do they value? How do they live those values? And you're seeing that across the board in all kinds of industries.
Yeah, I agree, Dawn. The phrase you'll hear quite a bit is meaningful work. And I think that, like you said, that may have always been there, but people are able to express that a little more now, that what they're looking for is work that impacts both themselves and their communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's at every level, right? It's every level in every industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are organizations doing? What are they kind of putting forth that they believe is very important or critical to getting that EVP? Like we talked about, flexibility, adaptability. So I would say kind of step one, if you're looking to take away some concrete things that we know candidates are looking for, we know organizations are looking to provide. It's both being adaptable ourselves, but also giving a chance for our candidates to be adaptable, for our jobs to be adaptable, and that we can communicate that. That compensation, sure, that's been there. And all of us can probably agree that, this is not something we can throw money at the problem and it'll go away. This is something that's affecting even those organizations that are at the high end of the compensation scale. They don't have that particular problem to worry about, but look at the fact that the flexible work schedule is above that, even if only barely. That means just slightly, more organizations are seeing that as a way to attract and retain talent. So it's extremely important to make that front and center in your talent acquisition efforts, that if you have these options at your organization, let people know, explain to them what that means beyond just, oh, you'll be able to, work from home certain days. How, who gets selected? How open is this? How's that all done? And, just let people know what's going on. Because, the big EVP motivators, the whole reason to maintain a strong employer value proposition is, yes, engagement, but number two, and I mean, we're talking even, right? Far and away from almost everything else, is that, improving the attraction and retention of top talent. That's right at the top. There's almost nothing more important than that. It's great to have, obviously customer retention, revenue. That's not saying those are unimportant, but, those are the kind of the critical elements of EVP and the sort of the why that motivates the whole concept of being adaptable, of showing that as a part of your strength and a part of your organizational culture. And I think that's a good segue. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I was just looking at the chat that was meant to say 2022. Yes, thank you, Hillary. I like this. This is a little more interactive. Normally, we don't get as much people chatting in. So yes, 2022. And I think that the giveaway from that is that if it had been 2012, it probably would have been just revenue, right? And employee performance. And now we're really starting to see a shift towards, creating an environment that is a win-win, that's adaptable at the organizational level, that's flexible enough to allow people to, create their own journey in an organization, to have a little more agency in the whole hiring and, onboarding process. But, that's already, even that was a good segue. You can only do that through, obviously, you're going to need the right process in place, but you're also going to need the right technology. And Dawn, that's where you can really help explain what that looks like at the ground level.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you not familiar, Hire Road used to be a company called Ascendre. Started out as an applicant tracking system and performance management software for large enterprise and government clients. And as the pandemic took hold and we just saw what was happening in the world of talent acquisition and what companies were going through, particularly companies that were a bit smaller, your mid-market organizations. Enterprise organizations have some of the same challenges too, but at the mid-market level, these companies they're less resourced, but they still have the same challenges. So how can they do recruiting in a world where there's a lot of competition for talent? How can they convey their employee value proposition? So we've got a product called HR Recruit, which is an ATS that is designed primarily for mid-market. We've got some larger clients using it as well, but it's approaching the whole applicant journey from a very modern perspective of, okay, what does the candidate today need? Candidates expect to be a bit more in control of the overall process. when they go and put in an application, they don't want to have to put it in 17 times. They want to put their application in once or upload their resume, and then they're off to the races. They want to be able to self-schedule interviews. They want to be able to know where they are in the process. If they've submitted, if they've taken the time on the candidate side to apply to a job, they want to know, like, am I in limbo? Is something happening? And especially when things are as heated and competitive as they are now, it's really nice as a candidate to be able to go in and say, okay, well, I know I'm a finalist here. This is my top pick. This is the one that I'm really hoping for. I have 2 other offers from other people, but I'm going to keep them at bay. These are just scenarios. So you take that on the applicant tracking system and the recruiting piece of it. So how do you attract people? How do you convey your employee value proposition while you are working to attract them? How do you hire them? And then once they're hired, how do you quickly onboard them? Because with turnover rates as high as they are, speed is the name of the game. Right? You want to find the right people, you want to find them quickly, you want to get them onboarded, and you want to get them productive in their role as quickly as you can. And this onboarding piece in between, or right after you hire somebody, being able to bring somebody into the organization with automated workflows that are trickling on the back end. So talent acquisition people and HR people aren't having to do a lot of manual, a lot of manual tasks that can be automated. It just makes everyone's life easier and provides a more seamless experience for that candidate, now employee. If I went through the process, really enjoyed the entire recruitment, I was able to self-schedule, I was able to do video interviewing, and all of those pieces. And then when I got onboarded, it was very clear what was expected to me right from the beginning. And I got connected to my hiring manager and to some of my teammates even before I started, and started getting a feel for who the organization was. And then if I need compliance training, those things, if it's all seamless, that's an amazing candidate experience. That's an amazing new employee experience. And they come in and you get them when they're enthusiastic and excited and motivated, and they hit the ground running. That's great impact for your business too.
Yeah, and we know that right now, all that importance that we saw in attracting talent, having that be part of the EVP and be part of what makes a successful candidate experience, we know organizations are struggling because, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this term, VUCA, just acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous, or sometimes all the above. In that environment, where do organizations see themselves as strong? Workplace performance. And even then, I want to point out that was the one that was rated the strongest. And that's only 2/3 of organizations, right? DE&I, about 50% feel they're able to maintain their DE&I, they feel they're strong in a VUCA environment. But attracting talent, just over 1/3 of organizations feel that they're strong. So that's the area that's hit the hardest, or I should say next hardest. I think that there was one just below that at a 33%, which was being able to do continuous learning in the flow of work, because that obviously gets disrupted when the flow of work gets disrupted. But attracting talent, so few organizations feel they're able to do that and are looking for help in doing that. I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler alert towards the end of the presentation, but I really want to point this out that if you find yourself as one of those organizations that's really having trouble finding ways to attract talent in a very uncertain and complex world, that's the majority of organizations. All right. So I don't know whether that's optimistic or pessimistic, but with the larger point being, there's a lot of organizations that are struggling with that. And how is that impacting specifically the candidate experience? Well, we can see that about only the most common challenges kind of split evenly. Lengthy time to hire, The process is cumbersome. The job descriptions are not accurate, mostly because they've probably been written for jobs that have changed quite a bit, or for one geography, and now organizations are saying, okay, we have remote work, and those job descriptions don't necessarily speak to the people that they're looking to reach out to. So, this sort of complexity, this sort of uncertainty is really causing, the number one challenges that we're seeing in there. And I think that lengthy time to hire, that is a perfect symptom of an underlying cause, right? You can't just go in and say, okay, we fixed the lengthy time to hire, because really that means that there's something else going on, that your internal processes are not adapted to the world we live in now. Probably because, as Dawn mentioned, there's too many manual parts of that process. I know from my experience, this was over 10 years ago, but I'm very young. You'll just have to imagine that you can see my picture. I was actually the head of HR for an RPO, for a recruitment company. So I was familiar with how a lot of different organizations would go about designing their talent acquisition process. And a lot of organizations really believed that their people, their humans, and I do believe humans should be involved, don't get me wrong there, were the only ones who could make a credible decision. And so there was no one that would come into the organization, no matter what their level was, that didn't have at least 4 interviews. That's a bit of an outlier, but I'm sure because of the number of people on, that at least someone works in an organization that is probably similarly structured. And because of that, imagine now trying to do that where you're working around different time zones, different schedules, with technology that may not support doing video interviews, or giving people don't have those skills. And that also doesn't even get to the fact that that may not be the way that some people interview best, right? Some people don't do well in that type of thing, and maybe their job doesn't require the type of skills that you would necessarily be looking for in a face-to-face versus another type of interview that could be done using an automated process. Now, and I know, Dawn, I don't want to put you on the spot because it's just something I know we've talked about sort of offline, but it's interesting because there's different types of skills, and I think it's a slightly out of date approach to think that the only way you can prove your value to the company is by interviewing well, in the traditional sense of
Right.
sitting down with someone, right?
Right. It's I look at education as a corollary here, and how things have changed and how people are tested. Right. There is a recognition that some people struggle in a traditional environment when they're testing. Well, the same is true for interviews. I'm a hiring manager. I hire people all the time. I don't want people that have to spend so much time thinking about the quote unquote right answer for the question, when really my interview style is more about just trying to assess who they are and if they are a good fit for the company based on their past experiences. And that's a very different type of conversation. So if we can leverage technology such as a video interview where you pose a question to them and they can answer it in their own time, they can record it 50 different times if they want before they submit what they feel is their best opportunity to put their best foot forward. You're going to get much richer information than you are people that are squirming because they're uncomfortable in that situation.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, the testing thing, I think anyone that's, I would imagine quite a few of our listeners here, they seem a smart group, probably been to school. Everyone remembers there's people who test well and there's people that doesn't, and that is not reflective on your ability to have understood the lesson, right? So in the same way, it's worth thinking about that when we think about interviews and we think about how the hiring process is done, that there are certain things that are better able to be handled by computers. I know we don't want to advocate for the dehumanization of the process at all.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not. People are core to all of this.
Mhm. But at the same time, there are areas where automation actually helps with creating more human interactions, right? Because you don't need a human to go, okay, how long did you work here? How long did you work here? All that could be entered in. And instead, those sort of interactions could be left for those more meaningful questions that get at things that are relevant to the job or relevant to what makes that candidate unique and the part that they want to explain and get across the best they can.
Yeah, exactly. I want a thoughtful answer. I want to know that somebody really thought about it versus they just felt compelled to spit out the first thing that popped into their mind, depending on the role. So.
Right. Yeah, I don't think it's been a while, but I would hope that you never have to hear what would you say is your what is it like your biggest well, not down
Your greatest strength, your biggest weakness.
your biggest I'm too much of a perfectionist. Yeah, I don't that you're not going to get anything meaningful out of that sort of thing anymore, right? We need
Especially when questions like that, like go Google it. There are like all kinds of websites that here's how you should answer that.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's been great. We've been talking about the the challenges from the candidate side. But Dawn, you also have some data from kind of the flip side of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the talent acquisition side, poor data and analytics, 61%. Doesn't surprise me. Completely understandable. Proliferation of systems, multiple systems doing different things. They don't talk to each other. Scenarios to practice. So number 2 is scenarios to practice leadership skills with guided working cases for practice and real-time feedback from the coach. So this is 48% of respondents, and then 43% coaching and networking with peers internally or externally. What is a better solution? What does a better solution look like? Is there a way to leverage technology for your data and your analytics? Is there a way to leverage technology for training and skill development and coaching and networking? Well, absolutely. We're using technology right now to network with each other. I wouldn't have, 10 years ago, I can't remember how long WebEx has been around, but 10, 15 years ago, this wouldn't have happened. So if we look at technology helping organizations attract talent, we've got a customer. They're a retailer. They were growing really, really quickly. They still are. International. I'm trying to remember how many countries they are, and I don't want to spit out a number because I'll be wrong, but it's multiple countries. Really young, edgy brand. Like they have a very, very distinct brand, and their recruitment process was incredibly antiquated and clunky. So you had these young, vibrant people who wanted to work for this brand because they had affinity for it, and they went to go through the hiring process, and it was so old school, and it was just this giant mismatch with who they were externally to the world as a brand and how they operated. Another challenge for them was that store managers were left on their own. So they didn't harness, some of them did, but not all of them. They didn't systematically harness the power of their brand to really woo employees. So they worked with us. They built a really strong new career site that is very indicative of their brand. Their career page, you can see the Higher Road career page here on the screen. Their career page looks very much like their brand. It looks like their stores. You hit that page and you're like, oh, yes. So if I've got an affinity for that brand and I want to work there, it's going to look and feel very similar. They consolidated advertising for their recruiting and what they were spending on it, which was fantastic. Using our ATS, they were able to do that, and they funneled everyone through one system. So they had information on the back end, all going through one system. So every candidate also got the same experience. It was a very systematic approach, which ended up speeding up their overall process. They were able to expand far more quickly than they had originally expected because they were able to find the people who fit their brand and could come and work in the stores so that they could fuel their growth. Technology can offer lots of things. You know, it's these easy to create job boards that allow you to brand them to look like you and to feel like you and to convey what you're all about and the employee value proposition that you deliver. Talent pooling, if you think about dynamic keywords in this race for talent, if you talk to somebody that fits your brand, but you don't have an open role for them at that exact moment, put them in your database, tag them so that when a position does come open, you're not starting from scratch. You've got a talent pool there to work with. And then the whole automated workflows that we've talked about. So scheduling, communication, shortlisting, building out email responses that are aligned to your tone and your brand that get automatically deployed so that from a talent acquisition, a recruiter's perspective, you're not banging out emails all day because we all know you have 1,000 more things to do than that. And then using the technology to help shortlist your candidates. It's a great time saver. So then onboarding, kind of that next step, you found the people, you've attracted them, you've recruited them on board, and now you want to bring them in. So record turnover plus hiring is this constant challenge to onboard people. And you've got this flux of existing employees who understand how things are done, but it may or may not be documented. Is there a way to bring new people into the fold in a faster, more consistent way? Yes, there is. Technology can help. Ensure employees are dedicating time to training, schedule it for them, map it out, build it out as a workflow in the system so that as people get onboarded, their schedule is automatically set for the next, I'm making this up, but we've seen scenarios like this where a new employee gets onboarded and their training schedule or their meeting schedule with the people they need to work with is set for the next 2 weeks. And that can all be automated. Onboarding now, where you've got virtual environments, you've got hybrid environments, it's really hard for people to fit in when they start in a role remotely. I started remotely. I started with Hire Road remotely, and it was the first time I've worked remotely before, but it was the first time I'd actually joined a company and not had that set 2 weeks of time in the office with the people that you're going to be working with. And it was very, very different. And so navigating that, it would have been very nice to have a technology to kind of say, okay, Dawn, you're starting next week. Here are the things that we need from you day one. Here's who, here are the people we're excited to have you meet, and you just hit the ground running and you start getting a feel for the culture beyond what's presented as part of the recruiting process. And ideally, it's all consistent. Retaining information, make me fill out paperwork once, please. Ensure employees dedicate time to training. We talked about that. The pressure to ramp quickly because turnover is so high. There's a dearth of talent. When people do bring people on board, these people are filling gaps that have been there for a while. So there is pressure absolutely to ramp quickly. And new employees feel that just as much as the hiring managers feel it. And then just that, again, the lack of tools that support hybrid environments. Because I think there was this expectation, at least early on in the pandemic, that things were going to go, and I'm making air quotes here, which you can't see, but they were going to go back to the way they were. And that obviously hasn't happened, nor do I think it's likely to. I don't know. We'll see. But back to the very beginning, it's all about being adaptable and having an adaptable approach. And so then workforce analytics challenges, this kind of gets to the heart of having all of these different systems. You've got all of these systems, all of this data that is really, really valuable and can help you answer a lot of questions if you know how to use it and if it can be aggregated. An analyst skill set is very different than a recruiter or an HR skill set. Granted, people play along different continuums. So I think about marketing, and marketing, you've got one side that's very analytical and one side that's very creative, and people play all along that continuum. So certainly there are recruiters who are very analytical, but there are also recruiters who are not analytical, and that's just a very different skill set. And it's easy to get measurement out of tools, but it's not always easy to get the impact or the insights. So as HR increasingly becomes a more strategic driver of business, arming HR with really valuable, rich data that pulls information from multiple systems and unifies it into one visualization of what's happening with the business can be really powerful. For example, I think about recruiting resources and how valuable it would be to know after X number of years, call it 2 years, that this one particular source, maybe you didn't get the most candidates from that resource, but 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you got some of the best employees that you've got from that resource. That's really valuable information to know. It's also difficult to capture because of the way systems are all managed differently. If your recruiting system doesn't talk to, or the data from these two systems isn't unified, your workforce management, you may never know that. And there's all kinds of questions like that that can get answered when workforce analytics is a very very specific approach within your business.
Yeah, I'll just mention here that, one of the things that will also be, in the takeaways, and something that I would strongly suggest is to review the metrics that you use. I think sometimes the metrics that we use for talent acquisition are reflective of our mindset going in. The one that I think of a lot, of course, is time to fill. Of course, that's important, but you should also be thinking about broader business metrics, and that will be different for each of your business. It should be aligned with your business goals. But
yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So technology can also help you retain talent. If these automated workflows for routine tasks, so we talked about background checks and new hire orientation, those kinds of things. If it's a seamless process, there are candidates. I've heard so many people, and this happened to us too, where they hired somebody and they either didn't show up for training at all, or they showed up for 2 days, or they got asked for a specific piece of paperwork, or something happened and they were like, peace out, I've got another offer. This feels hard. I'm going to go somewhere else. Not saying that technology can fix that, because in some cases that just is what it is. But if you make it as seamless as possible and as easy as possible for that person, that's better. And then integrating your key systems that connect the new hire journey all the way from application to thriving in their new role. That's one way to help retain talent, right? If I have a great experience coming into a business, I'm in a much different mindset than I am if it's hard to get onboarded into a business and it takes me a little while to get into my role and really start producing. We've got a company that we work with, a large manufacturer of generators. And they needed help with their talent and training initiatives. They use a lot of contractors. They use a lot of field contractors, and there are talented people out there that do not consulting work, but contracting work for these companies. So their training process was really, really clunky. So if I was out in the field and I had a skill set and I heard that they were looking for contractors and I wanted to sign up with them, it could take weeks to get through their training process, and then weeks for the schedulers to know that I had completed the training and was ready to be sent out into the field for jobs. And when there's a competition for talent, I have other options. So they realized that they were losing out on the talent to perform the work that they needed to do. So they automated their training. So once new hire contract paperwork was completed, they automatically, these folks, like as soon as my paperwork went in and I was approved, I got sent over to the training department. All the training was online. I did what I needed to do. And once I completed my training and got my certification, that certification was documented in their system immediately so that the schedulers can go in and say, okay, I need to know all of the people within 30 miles of this place that has certification in these two things. And they could automatically pull up people, and it happened so much faster. So the contractor experience or employee experience was significantly better. And they were able to grow really, really quickly just by automating that piece of it. So sometimes if you think about, we call it the -5 to 180 plus days in of a new employee. If you think about automating as much of that process as you can, so that folks really can hit the ground running, everyone is going to be better off for it. The business is going to get what it needs. The employer or the employees are going to be happier because they're going to be utilized.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've got a few takeaways we want to leave you with, some best practices. Obviously, I spoiled a couple of those, but worth bringing them up again. But also at the same time, feel free to enter any questions you have now. We're going to be doing the Q&A right after this. You guys will be receiving, all of you will be receiving the deck. There's also a link for it. And any questions we're not able to get to, we'll be able to have that by email. We'll get to you after that. But as we've talked about, I think, direct steps that can be taken is look at the integration that you have now. Think about how your TA is supporting broader HCM initiatives, right? So it's one thing to say, okay, well, we know generally we hire the people that allow these to get done, but does that really mean the same now? Do you have the right technology to support the kind of people that are needed for the new jobs coming in? Also, think about those metrics. Look at the metrics you use now for your dashboards when you're reporting up and reporting down. What is the key information that they need? It can't just be, as I say, time to fill. It should also be things that support, as Dawn mentioned, that entire employee journey. What is going on? If you have a D&I initiative, those sort of metrics should be on there. Those sort of things start from TA. Everything starts from TA. And then look at the tech solution. As Dawn mentioned, technology alone will not solve your problems, but you can't solve the problems without technology. So, look at your processes, look at your organizational strategy and how you're approaching TA, and then make sure that you have technology that supports the way they're going. And then finally, just remember you're not alone. I think for those of us that work from home, for those of us that are caught in this uncertain environment, there's feelings of, isolation, of alienation. It's the same things that we're talking about our candidates dealing with, anyone coming in. That's the same. We're all here together. We wouldn't be here if we knew all the answers, but everyone here, feel free to chat amongst each other, but also ask us any questions and we can keep the dialogue going. And as we've seen, this is not some small one-off. This is the majority of companies really struggling, especially in the talent acquisition area. So with that, do we have any questions, anything that you would like Dawn or I to speak to? I know that Dawn, we had gotten a question in earlier regarding whether this was an industry specific thing or something we're seeing kind of across the board.
Yeah, it's a great question. It is across the board, but it's across the board in different ways. So we're seeing some trends. So from where we sit, we're seeing some trends specific to industries that if you think about those that have really high volume seasonal kind of hiring practices. So hospitality, retail, where they really gear up for the holiday season or for specific buying times or seasons. That's a big one. And it's because you've got X number of recruiters and they need to recruit a very large number of people for a very during a very short window of time. So that's one we see a lot. That's a trend that we're seeing. And just the turnover in those industries, I think, is a little bit higher than it is in some others. Manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing organizations are looking to automate where they can. And if you look at what they've automated on their production side, they very well understand the value of technology and how it can help them. And so that is starting to feed in to some of the into some of the other functional areas within the business, including talent acquisition. Technology is another one. Technology companies are booming, especially those that are on a high growth path. The talent for sales and marketing in technology organization and developers too, like developer, that's just a given. But we're starting to see it now in sales, where there's an awful lot of churn in sales. And because the competition for talent, especially high growth environments, they've been throwing really crazy salaries at people.
Mhm.
And so there's an awful lot of turnover. So how do the recruiters get ahead of that? And how do they find people that might actually stick? If you think about the whole EVP piece, again, and then just having the data across the board to be able to look at things slightly differently than tools allow them to look at it right now.
Yeah. And there was a point that was made too that, any job or any organization that has sort of expanded how they look at remote work or work from home or, hybrid, that necessarily means that that's going to change the recruiting strategy, because if they used to only recruit in one geography, now that, they're allowing for that, and it's not just the same as, typing in a different zip code into a search engine, right? Different areas have different messaging that goes along. Obviously, it's going to change the compensation based on that locality. A lot of organizations are trying to decide whether they want to have a sort of compensation based on their home location, on where the candidate's location is, or just set a standard across. And that's not something that they had to think about before. But it also means, where do people recruit from? What's the average age? What is changed about the demographics? How does this affect DNI, or even how they define DNI?
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of challenges that come in with it. Yeah.
Yeah. DEI is huge. And it's one of those topics that I think, when done well and when done right, is incredibly powerful. But there's also a risk that it just becomes a tick box. Like, yep, check, we've done it. But really, have you? And I think that's an area for organizations to explore as well.
Yeah. That, we only mentioned it briefly, but onboarding, that's another one where it's kind of moving away from that checkbox, tick box and compliance, and into, how does this really support explaining to people our organizational values and culture? How does this get them started in a longer path? We all know that people are staying at jobs a shorter amount of time. So how do we make the most of that? Or how do we expand that time? Not
Right.
just the fact that, people are only going to be here a year, so why bother? But instead go, okay, well, why are they leaving? What's making people want to switch? It's because they're not seeing opportunities, right? They're not
Yes.
seeing a path in front of them. So
Yes.
that's early. It can be, after 3 years, then we'll talk to you. That starts right at the beginning in the recruitment and onboarding phase. So yeah, all good points. And thank you. I realize we're here at the end now. Dawn, thank you so much, everyone that joined us today. I saw we had some Floridians, North Carolina, people that are in the path along with me and Melissa. Thank you. I know that, you know, you're being adaptive and flexible and joining us. And as you can see in the chat box, there's the link, and that we'll be following up with an email as well. So thank you all, and thank you, Dawn.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yes.
Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.